Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another episode of Sapient Thoughts, where we discuss theophilosophical issues, where we answer those common contentions of the detractors of Islam, in addition to making our own arguments for the veracity of Islam. Today, inshallah, we're going to be tackling a contention that some of these anti-Islamic apologists have tried to put forth. One that stipulates, or that asserts, we could say, that the Quranic presentation of cosmology is one that says that the sun, it sets into a murky water spring. And why do they say that? Because of a verse in Surah Al-Kahf, chapter 18 of the Quran, where Dhul Qarnayn, one of the protagonists, one of the characters of the Quran, he goes to a certain destination and then he says that he sees the sun, وَجَدَهَا تَغْرُبُ فِي عَيْنٍ حَمِيَةٍ, that he saw the sun setting in a muddy spring. And they say this shows, because it's very clear in the Quran, they would argue that this shows that the sun, according to the Quranic cosmology, yes, setting in a spring of murky water. Now let's look at what the Mufassirun, the exegetes of the Quran aforetime have said. Look at Baydawi, look at Ibn Kathir, look at Ibn Taymiyyah. Even though he didn't do like a tafsir of the Quran, but he mentions this by mentioning that all of the spheres of the falak are mustadira or spherical. And Al-Qurtubi actually mentions in his tafsir that this, because obviously he was preaching, or his homiletic type of exegesis was also being preached to a non-Arab audience, and a lot of individuals they didn't understand that the word wajada could actually mean is perspectival, it's from the perspective of the individual. He said this is obviously not talking about the sun, which is many, many times bigger than the earth in which we live in, sinking into the spring of murky water in that literalistic sense. And what is the evidence of this from the Arabic language? The evidence of this is the word wajada, which is the operative word that is used in this verse. It means, one of the key meanings of it, according to Al-Asfahani, who wrote obviously one of the most authoritative dictionaries for referencing the Arabic language, Alfaz Mufradat al-Quran, he says in it that this wajada could mean anything from the five senses. So it's perspectival and it's something from the five senses that is experienced from the person experiencing them. So this wajada is clearly in the Arabic language perspectival, and it's the anthropocentric phenomenological perspective. And so from this perspective, it seems to me that this is really flogging a dead horse, or trying to put into the Quran what they wish really was clear in the Quran, and that they hoped was already in there. Now you imagine, sometime after today, maybe 100 years from now or 200 years from now, some atheists that live on, if the world continues to that period of time, they say, look at these fools that lived in the 21st century, they used to say that the sun sets, but we know from modern science that the sun doesn't set. We would say that these people are foolish, they don't understand how language works, because sunset in the English language, because it's not something foreign. Sunset is obviously, from our perspective, it's a linguistic kind of, not idiom, but it's something which is common speech, and is not intended in that literalistic way. So we would be saying that to them. Obviously, why can't you apply the same kind of common sense with the Quranic discourse? It's because you're begging, you're desperate to find some kind of thing, an entrance point for your narratives. And this is weak. Another thing that I would add, or that they say, is that there's another hadith which corroborates our understanding, which is the hadith when the Prophet was supposedly asked, where does the sun set? And he says, تَغْرُبُ فِي عَيْنٍ حَمِيَةٍ, that it goes into a spring of muddy water. Now this lafz of the hadith, this particular phraseology of the hadith was narrated by one individual called Al-Hakim ibn Utaybah, who is seen as a mudallis, which means that he's weak. Basically, this individual does something called an'ana, which means that he doesn't tell us where he gets his information from. He doesn't tell us who his teacher is. And so this an'ana is a form of disqualification from the hadith science perspective. And so this particular phraseology is not to be understood as strong. And that's why it's not mentioned Bukhari and Muslim. In fact, the hadith which is mentioned Bukhari is the one that we talked about in the other video, which of course you can watch in conjunction with this one if you want more information, the hadith of prostration. Now, if one argues that even though this is the case, we can do tahseen of the hadith, or some kind of strengthening of this hadith, and there are some scholars that say that this hadith is strong, and so on and so forth. Well, we can say that if you want to play with weak hadiths and weak narrations, we can also bring forward the qira'ah of Ibn Mas'ud and qira'ah of Ibn Abbas, which is actually weak, but can be argued to be strong in the same or similar senses that this one, where it says وَالشَّمْسُ تَجْرِي لَا مُسْتَقَرَّ لَهَا, that the sun runs and it has no place of setting. There's actually something which is attributed to both Ibn Abbas and Ibn Mas'ud. Now one can argue, if we do take this on board, wouldn't this run counter to what the Quran says, وَالشَّمْسُ تَجْرِي لِمُسْتَقَرٍ لَهَا, that it runs to a place of appointed for it? Well, actually, the jama' could be made, or contradistinction can be made between, or harmonization can be made between the two, in so much as that we can say that one is talking about time, or the Day of Judgment in the case of the qira'ah, which is well known, and the other one is talking about place. And of course we can make those arguments, but I won't make those arguments because we have to stick with the integrity of the Islamic tradition of authenticating that which is authentic and leaving inauthentic that which is inauthentic, or does not have the apparatus for being something which is an authentic hadith that should be taken as a gospel, if you like, or in this case Quran wahi for the Muslim. So I would say that if you want to play with weak hadith, we can all play with weak hadith and weak narrations and weak qira'ah. And in fact, the one that I have is much clearer by way of trying to prove the heliocentric model than the one that they have, by way of trying to prove that the sun actually literally sets in a spring of muddy water. And this, of course, runs counter to the Islamic understanding or the Quranic reading, where it says that the sun is in its own orbit in chapter number 21, verse number 33, in chapter number 36, verse number 40, in chapter number 35, verse number 39, verse number 5, and different places of the Quran. So in summary, therefore, this is a weak and feeble contention, a specious claim, which I hope now has been completely and utterly refuted, and hopefully that answers the question. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.